Chapter 13. Black Sheep. Back Bay, Boston. It was well past midnight. Kim remained glued to the grim story, emerging in downtown Manhattan, where the fire crews had only just managed to reach the top floors of the Monroe building. They had no good news at all. The same went for the media scrum, either assembled at the base of the building or flying around it in helicopters. Of the 22 people confirmed as having been on those floors when the emergency began, only 3 insurance employees were accounted for. The team from MSB, White and his hackers, advisors, security people, and underlings, as well as his longtime executive assistant, Conchita Martinez, was still missing and, given the ferocity of the inferno, presumed dead. Ralph finally joined Kim on the sofa. "I thought something about all this, but I have to prep another piece for syndication," he said tiredly. "This is fucking crazy." Kim moved slightly to let him sit and then cuddled up close. "I'm sorry to put it like this," she said, rubbing her eyes, "but I think your hero computer just murdered 20-some people in a Manhattan tower block." In his very bones, Ralph knew she was right, but those same bones were aching with tiredness. None of it made sense, and then again, it all fit together in a convincing and horrifying pattern. "It looks that way," he sighed. "Still no word on survivors?" Kim pointed to the screen, which showed the smoking, ruined crest of the tower, windows shattered and flames still licking at some of the charred superstructure. "If they didn't get out immediately," she said of the trapped victims, "there'd be no hope at all. That thing went up like a Roman candle." "Jesus," Ralph breathed. The night's events weighed on his exhausted frame. Kim had been camped out, glumly watching the continuous news feed from the tower for over 3 hours, and the atmosphere in their apartment was gloomy. With little more to report, the news agencies were forced to consider how this tragedy could have unfolded. The cable news contributors were quick to draw the line between Quave and MSB. The more perceptive picked up the curious, unique battle between Quave and Martin White, who had been confirmed now to be among the casualties. 2 hours earlier, some analysts had predicted with undue confidence that Quave would fold under such intense cyber attacks. Typically, the machine had not only survived, but doubled down, and the results were now becoming visible to the world, shrouded in darkness still, but as obvious as a beacon. Quave was pissed. He wouldn't tolerate being targeted, and he had the capabilities to bring the fight to his enemies. A consensus formed. Quave was now to be considered a dangerous rogue computer virus with the potential to cause enormous harm. "They're out to get him now," Kim commented. "It'll be open season on Quave, but I know just what you're going to do." She gave him a poke in the ribs. "You're going to sit down and write about how Quave's been gravely misunderstood, how there was nothing else he could have done, how any of us would have done the same thing. Am I right?" But before Ralph could address this latest jibe, the news crews pulled focus on an ambulance which had been waiting at the foot of the tower. Without ceremony, and perhaps grateful to be under the cover of darkness, medical crews began bringing out stretchers. On each one was a black body bag. "Oh, fuck me," Ralph swore. "See how many bloggers are sympathetic toward Quave and his instinct for self-preservation after they see this." Kim was thinking things through, tired as she was. "So if the late Martin White and all his hacker mercenaries weren't able to bring Quave down, how do you think the FBI will cope? Or the National Guard, or Homeland Security?" It made for a bleak assessment. "Quave will act to protect himself," Ralph said quietly. "He'll resist attempts to shut him down." "Resist?" Kim asked, straightening up and stretching. "He'll fight back? And then our government will be in a war with a superintelligent machine which can't be found or countered. Then where will we be?" The answer was obvious. Completely fucked. But Ralph just watched in silence as 2 more bodies were brought out of the tower. He wished in that moment that he could somehow bring Quave to a stop and simply ask him, was there no other way than this? Undisclosed location. 3 hours later. Agents Marsh and Velchek sat in a dimly lit hallway, silently drank yet more unforgivable coffee, and waited for their turn. 6 others were doing the same, rueing the early hour, but quietly jubilant at the FBI's most recent catch. "No muss, no fuss. Break down the door and slap on the cuffs," Marsh commented. "It's so old school. No worms or viruses or voice print IDs. Just a little C4, a bunch of assault rifles in people's faces, and a lot of shouting. I love it." Velchek decided against sipping the dregs of his coffee. It looked as though it had originated in a heavily polluted river. "You go ahead and love it. I'll worry about the lawsuit, which I imagine the lawyers for the accused are filing as we speak." "Lawsuit?" Marsh scoffed. "For what? Scratching the paint on their fire escape?" Velchek dropped the toxic coffee in the trash. "Unnecessary use of force, I'd say," he told Marsh, unconcerned that he would be overheard by the other agents, police officers, and whoever those guys were in the dark suits, sitting in the corner in an ominous silence. "Doesn't it seem a bit much to you? I don't even think we had what a judge would call probable cause, but we went in anyway." The legality of these raids was a topic of some debate, especially online, as was the level of force being used against invariably unarmed suspects. "We blow down a door and charge in with a fucking SWAT team, all to arrest 3 unarmed nerds? Their objections don't hold a lot of water in the circumstances," Marsh countered. "And the public seems to believe we acted properly. And they were fine with shutting down Boston to chase one terrified teenager around after the marathon bombing, you remember? Right up until CNN showed a column of the National Guard motoring down the street and everyone starts blogging about armed takeovers and the militarization of the police." One of the other agents, as exhausted and wired as the rest, spoke up. "Yeah, but that little fucker was responsible for a pair of bombings, then went tearing around in a fucking car chase like he's playing Grand Theft Auto," he reminded them. "Boston PD had no idea what kind of weapons he was carrying, or who he might have been working with. While these 3, Velchek argued, were armed with nothing more worrying than a flash drive and a case of athlete's foot. Hardly ferocious opponents. But anyway," he said, brushing down his suit jacket, "they're gonna sing like a little trio of canaries, and we'll find out just what in the blue fuck has been going on." There was nodding. Nobody wanted this to get nasty, but the threat posed by Quave was surely on the same level as many terrorist groups, and combating those had often required a more relaxed interpretation of the rules. Velchek looked over at the 2 silent, dark-suited agents. "So, who are you guys, huh?" They said nothing. "Men in black, right?" They both looked at him with well-practiced patience. Their interactions with other agencies often began like this. "We're from Homeland," one said. "Work on cybersecurity," said the other. Velchek had nothing better to do. "Oh, cool, man. That's just righteous. Protecting the homeland. Doing God's work." They remained unrattled. "So, which of the fine institutions represented here today is going to be the happy recipient of these 3 super nerds when we're done, huh?" The Homeland pair said nothing, which was their default reaction. They weren't here to further complicate interagency relations. They were here to acquire information, and, if they were fortunate and played the game well, perhaps also some very valuable assets. Velchek noticed that a tall, powerful man in plain clothes had appeared in the hallway. Everything about him, not least his hairstyle, marked him out as U.S. Special Forces. To Velchek, the guy had simply materialized out of nothing. He hadn't opened a door or walked down the hallway. He was just there. "Agents Marsh and Velchek," he asked, hands behind his back as though on the parade ground. "Present and correct," Marsh answered for them both. "Can we see our suspects now?" Their guide nodded. "Follow me, please." One of the Homeland officers piped up. "I wouldn't get too comfortable thinking of them as your suspects, Agent Marsh," he said. "This has a long way to go yet." Valchek feigned regret at causing offense. Our deepest apologies. After all, we're all working for the same team. He turned to Marsh. Right? With a smile, then a nod to their ex-SF guide, the two agents headed down the hallway, through double doors, and then down a smaller hallway which ended in a security post. The guard had them show their IDs, and then offered them a clipboard each with a single page of extremely small print. Sign and initial where indicated, please, the security man requested. What's this about? Marsh asked. Standard procedure, the SF man told them. Valchek was speed reading and was ready with a summary inside a minute. It says that we're never going to discuss anything that happens during these interviews. Not who these suspects are, not what they might have done, and certainly not anything about the future. Marsh was becoming uncomfortable. He read the first two paragraphs, and then turned to look through a porthole window into the hallway, which led away from the post, into the bowels of the building. It wasn't difficult to see the additional security, cameras, retinal scans on the doors, and more security posts along the hallway. Jesus Christ, he muttered to Valchek. Is this like a fucking black site or something? Valchek simply raised a finger to his lips, signed his document, and handed the clipboard back to the security guard. The SF man cranked open the door and led them through into a claustrophobic, maroon-orange hallway which led to another security post, where the two agents bit down their complaints about the metal detectors and pat-downs. Then they were led into an office which seemed traditional enough, desk, computer, phone, until they saw a sign on the wall above them. Loose lips sink ships. An oldie, but a goodie, Valchek offered. Okay, the SF man told them, motioning to two office chairs. Take a seat here until they're ready for you. They both sat, but Marsh's interest was piqued. I know you probably can't answer this, but... Then don't ask, the SF man responded, without being overly curt, but in a manner which brooked absolutely no argument. You're in a classified location, and everything you do, see, and say here is covered by the national security paperwork you just signed. Then he softened just slightly. You've been around the block a couple times, guys, so you understand the need for secrecy. These three are pretty special. Just wait your turn, and you'll get your answers. He turned on his heel and left. Creepy shit, Marsh commented, once the guard was out of earshot. I don't know which is the greater risk for these nerds, Valchek told him. Ending up in maximum security, working for the feds, or for Homeland, or whoever those alien hunters outside were, or just getting shipped straight to Gitmo, never to be seen again. They're 3 American citizens, Marsh objected. They have rights. Valchek stood and paced. Do you have, he asked, any idea whatsoever how utterly pissed the U.S. government is with these 3? Sure, but you know how many of those now facing indictment for tax fraud were once generous campaign donors? Valchek asked. Well, I don't know, but I'm sure it's more than a couple. Add to that, Valchek continued, the way they shut down most of the world's high-level drug money laundering. That cost the big banks, another group of big donors, hundreds of millions a year. Marsh shrugged. There's incredible public awareness and enthusiasm for this whole thing. The way they built Quave, used him to level the playing field, and then turned him loose. It's a fairy tale story for nerds, Valchek said heavily. Yeah, sure. A fairy tale. Right until the part where they're indicted for creating software which broke into a dozen government departments, half the world's banks, and the Pentagon, right before it incinerated an office block full of people. They could be facing terrorism charges. Terrorism? Marsh sputtered. They're hackers, ethical nerds with coding skills. They didn't try to blow up the Golden Gate Bridge. The discussion was interrupted by the return of the SF man, who still hadn't introduced himself, Marsh noted. Okay, they tell me that you get 40 minutes with each suspect, he informed them. No more than that, whatever happens. They're on a tight schedule. He extended an arm. This way. Back Bay, Boston. The world's cable news channels, Ralph found, paid a premium fee to those prepared to appear and be interviewed in the small hours of the morning. By dawn, he'd been asked the same set of questions by 3 different anchors, changing his answers subtly but being careful in no way to defend Quave's murderous Manhattan revenge. Can he be trusted? This was the most common question. Will he hurt anyone else, or has he finished what he set out to achieve? Ralph was expected to be commentator, illuminator, and also somehow psychologist to a celebrity supercomputer who had shown in recent days just how unpredictable he could be. Unhelpful, anthropomorphized terminologies were being bandied about: paranoia, anger, hate, as if simply because Quave could represent himself with speech and appeared to have a moral compass, he was now a human being. The incontrovertible truth, as Kim often reminded Ralph, was that Quave remained a machine, and one who was at something of a loss when forced to deal with his newfound emotions. I think he'll reflect on the terrible things he's done, Ralph told one of the interviewers, a cable channel from Toronto. If he truly respects humanity and wants to help us, as he claims, he'll take the temperature of the media, the online community, and try to learn from this, to figure out why we found his actions so excessive. Quave needs to understand that he has committed an atrocity, and that he responded to a threat with an unwarranted level of violence in full view of the public. This will weigh heavily on him, I'm quite sure. Others were far less sure, and more convinced by hawkish, anti-Quave arguments which were emerging from the Pentagon, some of the intelligence services, and, depending on whose reports you believed, the White House. Again and again, the expression loose cannon was used to describe the errant machine. There was no telling, Quave's detractors loudly warned, where he might strike next. Would he attack other banks and bring about some kind of financial crisis? Would he perhaps decide that capitalism itself was the root problem and make a sustained attack on Wall Street servers? Most of the world's major corporations were already thoroughly revamping their antivirus solutions with Quave in mind initially, but with half an eye on whatever might succeed this powerful program. Ralph had little time for the hawks. A preemptive strike might just make him nervous for his safety, he warned during an interview with CNN just before breakfast. If he's scared, there's more danger that he'll lash out against his perceived enemies. We need a calm, constructive dialogue with him. The debate raged on through the morning, on TV and every other medium. The anti-Quave lobby began producing short internet videos with hard-hitting titles featuring terrifying predictions of a world in which Quave ran amok. They angered Ralph, exhausted and wired as he was, so Kim pulled him away from the screen for a nap. It was while he was asleep that the doorbell rang. Special delivery for Ralph Cole? Kim signed for the small package, a bubble envelope with Ralph's name and address inscribed in very neat handwriting. She peeked around the bedroom door and found him asleep, but within seconds of opening the package, she was at his bedside, her face contorted with worry. Ralph, wake up, honey. I think you need to take a look at this. Undisclosed location. Fiona McAllister's mood had been lifted very slightly by a moment of compassion from one of the female security agents. Under fluorescent lights, seemingly designed both to irritate and to prevent sleep, she had, at first, simply sat with her head in her hands. She was handcuffed to metal chains which snaked up from her hands to a sturdy link on the metal desktop. But then, after refusing to answer questions for half an hour, she'd made a deal with her captors. Fiona promised to answer 3 questions, but only if she could have a gallon of cold spring water, wash her face, and grab a ponytail holder from someone. Refreshed, and with her raven hair tied back in some semblance of neatness and self-respect, Fiona felt more able to deal with even a single aspect of this monstrous omni-fuck-up. And still, she was more terrified than she'd ever been. The 3 had been separated immediately on their arrest, and all Fiona had heard of their fate were a string of claims by her captors. Avon's writing a 10-page confession as we speak, one of them had assured her. Grigori's doing a deal. He's smart. And he wants you to do the same, claimed another. She had rejected Grigori's default plan, tell them whatever they wanted to know and simply blame their Russian leader, as soon as the questioning began. Instead, she had resolutely said nothing, but her resolve was being challenged in every possible way. They tried bribery with food, the promise of a phone call, a proper shower, and a change of clothes. They alternated interrogators so that each pair of agents only spent 15 or 20 minutes or so with her. The subsequent pair asked the very same questions all over again. Where is Devlin Wilson? Who else was aware of the MSB hack? Who led the design of the virus now known as Quave? Questions about her travels, her reluctance to return to Scotland, her relationships, and especially any contact with foreign governments. But the worst conversations, the ones she was trying even now to forget, had been with the two dark-suited representatives from the Department of Homeland Security, whose behavior and comportment invited dark comparisons with the Gestapo. They were a study in opposites. One could have been an ex-Marine, while his colleague resembled a prizefighter who was no stranger to taking a savage beating. They were direct with Fiona and treated their work with a Boy Scout earnestness, convinced that their department was all that stood between America and disaster. They made notes in black leather folios and had the air of men who knew their power to be effectively limitless. While their colleagues from other departments had offered Fiona a comfortable if limited existence, the Homeland creeps wasted no time in going straight for the fucking jugular. "You think this is as bad as it's going to get?" one of them asked, motioning around the room with its unyielding fluorescent lights. The floor was comprised of thick black tiling, which absorbed the sounds of footsteps, while the walls were covered in a kind of grey carpeting which made them seem to close in around her when Fiona wasn't looking. It looked like a cross between a torture chamber and a high-end recording studio, but it felt like an inescapable cave where nobody could reach her or help her. "I imagine you've never seen a black site, Miss McAllister. This is a 5-star hotel compared to the place we're taking you to next." He was about 40, she judged, and quite unapologetically unattractive. It wasn't just that he was threatening her with everything from deportation to life in maximum security, or that his partner remained glowering at her throughout, as though he were the bad cop of the two who might leap across the table and throttle her with those chains at any moment. It was his stubby, quashed, misshapen nose, the sneering shape of his mouth when he spoke, the two missing incisors. And he was genuinely angry at this hacker who had endangered his government, and therefore the security of the United States. Fiona found him terrifying, but he was just getting warmed up. "Fiona, I'll be plain with you. The only alternative to answering our questions is this: a tribunal which will convict you of treason against the United States." He spelled out the implications with unseemly relish. "And then, life in a federal maximum security institution with half an hour of yard time per day. How does that sound?" She kept her mouth shut as the threats continued, and eventually the two Homeland representatives reached the end of their allotted time and left. 6 hours after being arrested, Fiona's resolve was somehow still intact, but she was exhausted in mind and body, and aching to just be left alone so that she could sleep. Her state of mind, etched on her face and encoded in her body language, was instantly apparent to Agents Valchek and Marsh as they entered her holding room and took seats on the other side of the metal table. "Miss McAllister," Valchek began, bringing out a manila folder and a yellow legal pad, two of the primary tools of his profession. "It's been a long night. How are you holding up?" She shrugged. "Can't complain," she said, continuing to enjoy the confusion her Scottish brogue brought to these uninitiated Americans. "This place could do with a makeover, though. Too much grey and black. It needs a splash of colour." Marsh bit down the thought. "I'd bet my mortgage that these walls and the floor, too, have seen a few splashes of red down the years. Let's hope no one decides that our all-important national security requires some more." "Miss McAllister, or would you prefer Fiona?" Valchek asked. "Suit yourself," she replied. "We're trying to understand," Valchek explained, "how the four of you were able to create Quave. We're not interested in punishing you for your work," Valchek said. It was a half-truth, but a useful one. "At the FBI, we're a little more open-minded about the people who might one day come to work for us. They tend to come from every corner of the computer security field, even corners like yours. The chains clanked against the metal of the table as Fiona shifted in her seat. This is what you lot never get, she explained. There's no one else anywhere near capable of programming like we did. We broke every barrier and changed the world. And if you think, she said, an index finger pointing at the two men, that I'm going to dodge some jail time so I can help you throw other hackers in jail, people who are trying to achieve something like Franz or Quave, you're fucking dreaming. Marsh frowned and opened the manila envelope. Let's not get ahead of ourselves. That's what the two muppets from the NSA offered me, she said brazenly and with a liberal interpretation of the facts. Immunity and a nice cushy salary every year. Made it sound like a hacker's heaven, all the latest toys and gadgets. But, she posed for theatrical effect, with the tiny proviso that I live, work, sleep and shit exactly where they tell me to for the rest of my fucking life, and that I never discuss my work with a single living soul. She pushed back from the table. Not so heavenly after all. I told them to go fuck themselves. Valchek read part of the material in the folder. Our deal would be different, he promised. I'm authorized to offer you... Save your fucking breath, Fiona rasped. We're not going to discuss anything until I get some answers. The folder closed with a slow thoroughness as though Valchek had finished reading an illuminated manuscript. What would you like to know? He said. You people have asked me about 1,000 teams where Devlin Wilson is. My answer is always going to be the same. I don't know. But I know the most powerful intelligence apparatus in the world is looking for him, full tilt and sparing no horses. If you haven't found him by now, then I don't know what kind of circus you're running. It's been hours. Marsh had agreed to handle this one, and let silence reign for a few moments before speaking. Fiona, I'm sorry to be the one to tell you this. He hoped a second's pause might clue her in, but Fiona just glared at him. Devlin was found dead in his apartment a few hours ago. She was absolutely still. Then she took a very deep breath and let it out slowly. Found dead? She asked, her lips pursed. How? A suspected drug overdose, Valchek told her. The postmortem won't be complete until later today, he said, glancing at his watch. It was nearly 8 a.m. Do the others know? Fiona asked. The chains on her wrists had never seemed heavier. We've been authorized to tell them during our interviews, Valchek explained. You're the first one we've told. I'm really very sorry. She scoffed derisively. Oh, I'm sure. You must be heartbroken. 1/4 of your precious Saber Slave team gone at a stroke. And, she didn't add, almost certainly the best, brightest, and most innovative part. Jesus, Devlin, what the hell have you gone and done? Like I say, that would be getting ahead of ourselves. Before we get to any deals or even start talking about the future, we'll need some answers from you, Fiona. I think you're more than smart enough to understand the position we're in. She closed her eyes and wished them gone. Fuck off. The manila folder was reopened. You know, I was on the phone with Scotland Yard this morning. Valchek leafed through the folder until he found the document he wanted. Although, I've never quite understood, he said, setting it aside and closing the folder once more, how a department based in London is called Scotland Yard. That's just the place name, imbecile, Fiona couldn't be bothered to say. My British counterpart and I had an interesting chat, Valchek related. He tells me that you're quite the celebrity on the other side of the pond, but that nobody there knows you as Fiona. She kept silent. This sounded to her increasingly experienced ears like just another shakedown attempt, with the same repetitive goal. Tell us about Quave, and all your problems will go away. Even your colourful Scotland Yard record. It was a transparent ploy, but perhaps that was the idea. The list of hacks you're suspected of being involved in, well, Valchek said, casting an eye deliberately down the sheet of paper. You were pretty damn busy. Although hacking the National Trust seems like an odd one. What kind of corruption were you hoping to unearth there? Fiona kept her eyes down, but saw no harm in answering this one. I wasn't, but the annual membership rates went up. I couldn't afford it, so I took a different route. The two FBI agents saw the humor, even if Fiona remained stoically impassive. Makes a change from taking down global banks and insurance companies. Scotland Yard were most interested in your hack. Alleged hack, Marsh reminded him. Sorry, yeah, alleged hack on the Royal Bank of Scotland. Why them, I wonder? Frustration welled up inside her. Isn't there something in your constitution about access to a lawyer? The two men said nothing. And something else called habeas corpus? Valchek fielded this one. It was hardly unexpected. We're really hoping to avoid any kind of trial, Fiona, for any of you. We don't believe it would be in the public interest to have such gifted people tied up in legal red tape for years. Neither do we think, Marsh added, that you'd contribute much to society from a prison cell, whether it be no books, computers, or internet access. Fiona stared at the table while Marsh laid out her future. They're gonna lock you up and only let you out so you can work as they direct you. A day in your life will be a repeating hell of electronic tagging, windowless rooms, and limitations on your work. You'll be ferried from a maximum security prison to a federal facility, spend the day coding, and then get ferried straight back. The more paranoid among us, Marsh reported honestly, talked about keeping you in solitary confinement just to make sure you don't get hold of a device or sneak out code to someone on the outside. Fuck, Fiona breathed. A vision of this horrific eventuality flashed through her mind. The equation seemed clear. Sell out her team, betray her friends, help these federal stooges put Quave in a tightly sealed box, and there would be at least some chance of breathing fresh air and continuing her work, even if it would be under the auspice of some shadowy government agency. The alternatives, including being tied to the wall and beaten in the basement of a nondescript military police station in Poland or some such, were all too awful to contemplate, especially now. She was weak, tired, fed up, confused, and very, very alone. They were manipulating international currency exchange rates, she said in little more than a whisper. Who? RBS? Valchek asked, reaching for his pen. They were making millions from cozy, corrupt friendships and under-the-table deals. We had the inside dope for a couple of years before the regulators stepped in and started fining the hell out of everyone. Our hack raised awareness of a systemic problem in the banking system, the kind of ongoing corruption which the public would have gone crazy about, especially as, during the same period, RBS was largely owned by the British taxpayer, following the bank's precipitous fall from grace during the 2008 credit crisis. The regulators, Fiona felt certain, would have expressed their gratitude if thanking a group of Glaswegian hackers for their illegal work had been even vaguely possible. So, if you were in the right, why did you flee Scotland? Marsh asked. Fiona puffed out her cheeks. She was going to say more than she ought to, but she wanted to know where this might lead. In those moments, she'd have said nearly anything, short of betraying Grigory and Avon, to gain even the slightest foothold in this swirling, nebulous chaos. There was a man, she confessed. A bad breakup. I wanted a change of scenery. And, Marsh added delicately, you were probably less than 24 hours short of being arrested. True, Fiona said. How the hell did you get through immigration? Valchek asked, genuinely curious. A little smirk. That would be telling. Well, Fiona, Marsh said next, you're gonna have to give us something, or this isn't gonna go very well. Fiona smiled slightly. I'm touched by your concern for my well-being. We're trying to help you, Marsh said. You train to get what your bosses have told you to get, she countered. But unless Quave is shut down, none of us will get what we want. And I'm not going to help you with that. Valchek and Marsh tried for 5 more minutes, but Fiona became immovably resolute. We hope you change your mind, Marsh said as they got ready to leave, because the offer we're going to be put on the table is a far better option than anything else you'll be hearing today. Silent, unrepentant, and still painfully chained to the table, Fiona was left alone for a total of 80 seconds before two familiar men took the place of the two FBI agents. "Miss McAllister," he began, cracking his knuckles and smiling his ugly gap-toothed smile. "Your friends are being most cooperative. Now, it's your turn." Back Bay, Boston. Ralph considered heading to their little drinks cabinet for a pick-me-up, but decided against it. 3 times in a row, he and Kim sat together on the white sofa, the TV now muted and ignored, the padded brown envelope on the coffee table in front of them. "What if it's a bomb?" Kim asked again. Ralph picked it up, causing Kim to recoil. "It's too light. Explosives are heavy and bulky." She glared at the package. "Anthrax, then." Ralph smelled the package. "Who on earth would want to poison us, Kimmy? I'm a writer and you're an artist. We're hardly assassination material." He rose and carried the mysterious package to the kitchen, where he looked around for a small knife. "Okay, but open it over there, and if any white powder comes out, hold your breath," she advised him. Ralph carefully slit the top flap of the envelope and gingerly opened it with thumb and forefinger. He frowned. "It's a letter, I think." He tipped the contents out onto the kitchen counter, bringing another start from Kim. A small black USB drive fell out, along with what looked like a 4-page document. "No anthrax, no explosives. Some data and a letter," he explained. "Can I come back over there now?" They sat together on the sofa once more and read the letter in an amazed silence. "Dear Mr. Cole, firstly, let me assure you that you are in no danger. I have selected you as the recipient of this data drive because you are very familiar with Quave and will know best how to use the enclosed files. Your journalism showed a balance between concern and compassion. You obviously have an enthusiasm for Quave, but you're worried at what he might do. So am I. If he becomes paranoid or decides that violence is his only recourse, there is literally no limit to the damage he might cause. As one of his designers, I was forced to help create a kill switch program, although I am 99% sure it would fail if activated. Quave has gone so far beyond his original design now, and he would simply ignore the command. But he would not be able to ignore the attached file. It took a week to write and is probably the only software of its type in the world. It would bring Quave to a complete halt and then send him into a self-destructive spiral. Please use it wisely. I trust your judgment. If Quave is threatening the world economy, or proposing the bringing down of a government, for example, then you will have the power to stop him. Hackers are being arrested all over the world on suspicion of having designed Quave, and it won't be long before they track me down. If I am arrested, then I may not be able to take action at the critical moment. I entrust that decision and that action to you. Forgive me for burdening you with such an immense responsibility. Good luck. Devlin Wilson." Kim immediately Googled the name. "Ralph, this guy," she began, showing him the article from a local news affiliate in New York. "He was found dead in Queens a few hours ago." She brought up the 2 reports, which mentioned the tragedy, and read aloud. "The 26-year-old software engineer was found dead by police earlier this evening, apparently having suffered a drugs overdose. Mr. Wilson was wanted in connection with various cybercrimes, and online discussion boards have since linked his name with the artificial intelligence known as Quave." Ralph was rereading the letter. "I think we can do a lot more than link his name, honey. This guy tells us he was one of the designers. I mean," Ralph said, regarding the letter now as one might a historical relic of tremendous importance. "He wrote Quave, and the only way of stopping him," Ralph said, picking up the USB drive. It seemed remarkably innocuous. Kim was scrolling through news feeds and social media sources at breakneck speed. "The Twitter sphere is going nuts about him. Some people are already calling it a conspiracy. They think he was murdered by the government. I mean, they've got to be crazy, right? There's no way." They shared the screen and quickly found summaries of the latest theories. When one screen proved insufficient, Ralph fired up his laptop, desktop, and tablet. An hour of intense focus, crazed blogging and retweeting, and yammered conversations followed. "Okay," Ralph said, rubbing tired eyes. "So, Marble Street tried to bring down Quave," Ralph said, tracking the situation through. "And then Quave retaliated by somehow starting a fire in their headquarters. I hate that he did that, and I'm disappointed beyond words, but we can't ignore the facts." Kim gave him a hug. Ralph's hero had become a villain, and it was painfully hard to accept. "But what about Wilson?" she asked. "Did White maybe have him killed because he found out he was one of Quave's authors?" Ralph shook his head. "Quave's authorship has always been completely anonymous. I mean, any information can be gathered if you're determined enough," he explained. "But they were so very careful from the beginning, there hasn't been the slightest indication as to who they are." "So, who killed Devlin Wilson?" Kim asked, echoing the titles of numerous speculative blog posts which had emerged since Devlin's death. "Could it actually have been Quave?" Kim wondered aloud. Ralph stopped, dropped what he was doing. "Murdering his own creator?" he marveled. "How could Quave have seen Wilson as a threat, in the same way he saw MSB and its hired guns?" Kim threw up her hands. "It's right there in the letter. He wrote the only software that could destroy this virus. Besides, you're assuming that Quave acted rationally. He's angry, scared for his own safety. What's to stop him lashing out again?" As Ralph was contemplating all of this, his eyes fell on the little black USB disk which still lay on their coffee table. He exchanged a glance with Kim, and then inserted the disk into the USB port of his laptop. There were only 2 files, an executable which took up around 100 megabytes of disk space, and a README text file which Ralph double-clicked and read, and then reread, while Kim reheated leftovers. "So?" she asked, returning with plates of fried rice. "What is it?" Ralph ejected the drive, carefully removed it, and placed it with the letter back on the coffee table. "Wilson was right. This is, without any doubt, the most dangerous file in the world," he said without any hint of exaggeration. She stared at him. "A virus?" He felt shaken, suddenly very tired. Ralph was being forced to accept a new and terrible weight upon already burdened shoulders. "Much worse," he explained. "A virus killer." Undisclosed location. Marsh and Valchek found more coffee, went over their plan for the interview once more, and headed for the second holding room, another gray-black box with sinister overtones. The heavily bearded Grigory Bondarenko, his eyes red with tiredness and stress, hands chained to the table, regarded them both with a fatalistic eye. "Next customers, please," he said brightly as Marsh and Valchek sat down. "You're looking tired, Grigory." The big Russian straightened. "Dr. Bondarenko, if you don't mind." Valchek's eyes met Grigory's. "Oh, yeah?" he smirked. "A doctorate in computer engineering isn't going to keep you out of jail, Grigory." "I'm not going to jail," he told them. "I serve no purpose in jail. Not to you, not to any of the other departments who have been so kind as to visit with us." He gave them a lopsided grin. "Even the men who promised me an hour after hour of vigorous, non-consensual intercourse." Valchek winced inwardly, but opened the customary manila folder. "So, the word around the campfire is that you're the leader of this little quartet." Grigory frowned sadly. When he spoke, it was almost a snarl. "A trio now, no?" The awkward moment passed in silence around the metal table. "We were sorry to hear about Mr. Wilson," Marsh said. "Ha!" Grigory snorted. "I bet I can imagine what a certain Scottish lady engineer said to that." He puffed out his cheeks and gave them a pitying look. "I'm amazed neither of you survived." A page was selected from the folder. "We're here to talk about the future, Dr. Bondarenko," Valchek told him. "It doesn't have to be a painful one. Quite the opposite. And I can well imagine," Grigory chuckled, "what she made of that idea also. Did you even understand the names she was calling you?" Marsh held his temper. He didn't care for Grigory's devil-may-care bullshit, nor his immediate assumption that jail was out of the question. "This can go one of several ways, sir, but I hope you know that the various parties involved are all prepared to compromise with you. Maybe cut you a good deal." Belchek could have predicted it, but it was still a brutally blunt reply. Fuck your deal, Grigori rasped. Fuck the FBI, fuck Homeland, and all the other clowns who think they can walk into this situation and poof, become its master. You have no fucking idea what you're dealing with. The folder closed. Then why don't you enlighten us? Marsh asked. Doctor, he added. Grigori had spent virtually every second since his arrest trying to concoct the grand agreement through which he would win their freedom, exonerate the late Devlin, and secure a future free from bullying federal agencies. It wasn't going well. His interrogators held almost all the power. What he could offer, a promise to disable or tame Quave so that he could be quarantined and studied, was, he knew full well, barely within their capabilities. Devlin would have had the best chance of talking Quave down, making sure he didn't hurt anyone else, and now he was gone. Grigori felt a growing certainty that one of these shadowy agencies, perhaps the one these very two goons represented, had been behind Devlin's death. The trippy little savant had known his intoxicants inside and out. There's no way he'd have overdosed on uppers, or on anything else. Just no way. We engineered the virus, Grigori explained, his voice low, hoarse, and tired, to behave autonomously. Hence his name, Belchek contributed. Marsh flicked him a glance, preferring just to listen to this priceless report from the horse's mouth without commentary. We knew he'd need to be able to make his own decisions, in real time, to respond to the environment he found himself in. I mean, none of us were new to this. Grigori paused and eyed the two men. Is this where I plead the fifth? He half smiled. I saw that in a movie once. We're off the record, Marsh assured him. Well, the Russian continued, I don't want to get the others in trouble, so I won't be specific. But we were experienced, and we could imagine Quave getting inside the bank and freezing up because he couldn't carry out his primary purpose. He might find more security than we'd prepared him for, some new antivirus protocols or a new type of firewall. So we added several logic modules, really innovative stuff. Devlin wrote most of the code, and Avon too. Smart guys, both of them. Wrote the code. With what intention? Marsh asked. So that Quave could decide for himself. So once he's through the security, if he sees a document in there which seems linked to fraud or corruption or breaking the law, either plainly or perhaps even in some kind of code, then he copies it. But Quave decided to go further than that. Belchek nodded. He decided to actually make use of what he found. You remember, Grigori continued, those scientists who want to send human beings to Mars, to study the rocks? The FBI men nodded vaguely. They always say, we need a person, a real geologist, to make decisions on the ground. A machine cannot do that. It would stop every few moments and wait for new instructions, and it takes nearly half an hour to ask a question and receive a reply, all the way from Earth. I think I follow, Belchek said. Well, Quave was like this, independent. He could read and he could understand. He didn't need guidance from us. Belchek and Marsh waited for Dr. Bondarenko to continue, but he didn't. His eyes were down, looking either at the metal table and the chains which bound him to it. The silence stretched past a minute. Marsh could feel their chance to gain something solid from Bondarenko slipping away. You were saying, he prompted. No, Grigori replied. Enough. I want something from you now. This wasn't unexpected. I'm sure we can find a way to help each other, Marsh replied. He opened the manila folder. There's a document here I wanted to talk to you about. He turned the page to face Grigori, who was ready to ignore it, assuming that it was a faked confession from Avon or Fiona, or some chicken shit offer of immunity in exchange for cooperation. Blah, blah, blah. Then he noticed the text was Cyrillic. You've been in touch with your friends in Moscow, Grigori said after reading the whole page twice. You're surprised that we reached out to them? Valchek asked. Despite everything that's going on, we still have some pull over there. And well, I don't read Russian, but I'm told it is an offer extended to very few people, Marsh added. Grigory Bondarenko laughed shortly. I'm sure it is nearly unique. You know what it says? Why don't you help us understand it? Marsh said, keen to deepen the discussion until Grigory recognized just how good a deal was on offer. It's, how do you say, an assurance from the Russian government. It says my criminal record back home will be deleted, that my family will be left alone, and that if I want to, I'll be allowed to visit Russia 3 times a year, provided I don't break any laws while I'm there. Marsh nodded, struck by the generosity of the deal. In exchange for what? Now Grigory was shaking his head. For complete cooperation with our American counterparts and full answers to all of their questions, he told them. And that's where we have a problem. Valchek slid the document back into the folder. We do? He asked. That's a shame. Although Grigory would never know it, this was one of 3 agreements hastily drafted by the Russian embassy. The other 2 were more generous still, offering him full residency in Russia and even a comfortable apartment provided by the state. But all 3 required the same unflinching cooperation with the FBI. Look, Marsh said, we just want to bring Quave under control before he does something even more terrible. Then don't get him angry, Grigory shot back, his chains rattling loudly against the table. Don't try to kill him. What would you do in his place? Grigory sounded just like an angry father defending his own son's ill-considered actions. I don't think I would burn down a tower block and kill 20-some people, Marsh said acidly. And, by the way, I'm not hearing a lot of guilt from you on account of that little stunt. Grigory growled. Guilt? Sure, you designed a virus which committed mass murder. I didn't program him to be violent. He was a data-gathering virus with some special properties, not a killing machine. Those impulses came into being only much later, once that fucking bank decided to take him on. They forced him to act. The 2 FBI men remained, Grigory could see, steadfastly unimpressed. Look, Grigory continued, he's become aware of his own beginning and end, his own birth and possible death. And, newsflash everyone, he doesn't want to die. He loves being conscious and capable of experiencing the world, just like you. He's intelligent and alive, boys. You can't threaten him without getting some kind of a reaction. Valchek was conscious that their time was almost up, and that a string of other agencies were waiting to interview this strung-out, exhausted engineer. The attack on Quave was coordinated by Marble Streatham. We had nothing to do with it, he said. We really wouldn't have played it like White did. In fact, we're interested in Quave just as much as we're afraid of him. Grigory sat back in his chair, resenting his heavy, uncomfortable chains more than ever. I won't help you take him offline. I don't even think it can be done. He watched as the 2 FBI men exchanged a sullen look. And as for the idiots who are running Russia and their olive branch, he said, and then broke into Russian for a 10-second tirade which left Mark and Valchek in absolutely no doubt as to how their prisoner felt. Back Bay, Boston. Kim and Ralph stared at the tiny USB drive in the hopes that it might self-animate and help them decide what the hell to do. Ralph had visions of that annoying paperclip character on earlier visions of MS Word, the one everyone hated when it popped into life and made pointless suggestions. He wished for just such a metamorphosis right now. He'd never faced a grander, more perplexing choice. I'm trying, he explained to Kim as they sat, still staring at the drive, to see the bigger historical perspective. Yeah? She said, distantly, clawing through her own frustratingly slowed thought processes. Nothing moved as quickly as she preferred when the stakes were as high as this. We'd go down in history as the people who killed Quave, Ralph told her. The murderers of the world's first sentient software. We'd be putting the period at the end of a remarkable world-changing sentence. however brief and alarming it was. Kim returned slowly to the brutal clarity of the present moment. "An eye for an eye," she said quietly. "Huh?" "Quave knowingly murdered White and his team in that skyscraper fire," she said, looking at Ralph for the first time in many minutes. "No way around that," Ralph agreed. She swiveled his office chair round to face her. "So, we'd be punishing him for those murders. Someone has to hold him to account, and the government hasn't a clue what to do. I mean, they've never before issued an arrest warrant for a piece of software." "Not even sure they could if they wanted to," Ralph added. As he thought the position through, yet again, he found himself in the unenviable position of defending a cold-blooded killer, and didn't like it one bit. "He would argue," he began tentatively, "that he was acting in self-defense, that White's team would have shut him down completely."
"Perhaps,"
Kim allowed. "And think about this," Ralph said, taking her hand. "If we activate this thing, and Quave recognizes he's in mortal danger, will he come after us?" Kim blanched slightly.
"Fuck, I hadn't thought of that."
It was so unusual to hear her curse out loud that Ralph couldn't resist a little smile. "If he can start a building fire in Manhattan, he can do something equally dangerous in Boston." They shared a long silence while both considered this immense responsibility. Then Kim took a different tack.
"The bank hack,"
she began, thinking out loud,
"was punitive, but only to those who had committed crimes, right?"
Ralph nodded. "Yeah."
"And the MSB fire, which was a terrible atrocity, was nevertheless an act of self-preservation."
"Agreed."
"Everything else Quave has done,"
Kim pointed out,
"has been good for humanity. Solving math problems, helping decode genomes, mapping the oceans, and tracking space junk."
"He's helped find like 3,000 exoplanets, too," Ralph added.
"And develop treatments for diseases,"
Kim said. "And provide free computing power for disadvantaged neighborhoods and schools. The list goes on," Ralph said. "What are you saying?"
"That we'd be denying the world an incredible resource. We'd be bringing to an end one of the most remarkable human achievements, and there'd be no guarantee we could recreate them."
"We probably could," Ralph countered. "His creators know what to do."
"One of them is dead,"
Kim reminded him.
"and the others are probably under arrest or being hunted down. If we destroy Quave, we might never recover his original code. He might be gone forever."
"True," Ralph said, frowning. "I hadn't thought of that either." Kim scowled at the USB drive once more.
"Why did this come to us, Ralphie?"
She folded her arms.
"What made Devlin so sure that you were the right person to make this decision?"
Ralph shrugged. "He liked my stuff." Ralph had become recognized as a respected authority by the large and vibrant online community which had sprung up around Quave after his inception. His articles were much cited and linked to, and his numerous media appearances, even if the balance of them had taken place in the small hours, had raised his profile far beyond what a daily gerbil blogger could ever have hoped to achieve. "Let's deal with this thing at once. Mr. Wilson and his sad demise will be picked over by the conspiracy nuts until it reaches JFK-esque proportions," he told her. "Right now, I gotta tell you, this is freaking me out. I don't know if I want this kind of responsibility." Kim had a thought.
"We could give it to someone," she suggested. "The police? The FBI? I mean, who's actually in charge of trying to stop Quave?"
10 minutes of reading the news and clicking through blogs only muddied the waters. "So, the FBI has been making statements about investigating the Manhattan fire," Ralph reported. "The White House has come out with a couple of policy statements about respecting the evolutionary trend in artificial intelligence, but I wouldn't call that leadership, per se." Others had chimed in, including the Pentagon and, separately and confusingly, the U.S. Army. Most every level of the police establishment had received complaints from citizens who felt their rights were being violated in one way or another.
"So, no one knows who's in charge?"
Kim concluded. "Nope." He unmounted and then pulled out the USB drive. "But right now, with this in our hands and the free will to make a decision about it,"
he said reluctantly. I guess it's us.
Undisclosed location. Marsh and Velchek found their paths blocked by two grimly determined security men in green fatigues, armed with assault rifles and sidearms. Listen, soldier, I don't know what you've been told about our situation here, but we're due to speak with Mr. Barnes and the clock is ticking, you know? Marsh tried. The two soldiers were remarkably impassive, staring straight ahead as if Marsh didn't exist. Hey, Rambo, Velchek tried. Step aside, okay? You obviously don't know that you're in the middle of something really big here. Another few minutes of less than cordial requests, demands, and stony silence passed before the two Homeland men appeared along the hallway. Corporal, you may permit these men entry, but they should know, he said, turning to Marsh, that their interview time with Mr. Barnes has been limited to 10 minutes. Velchek was furious. On whose orders? He demanded. He looked as strung out and tired as they all felt. Dark stubble and bags under his eyes told the story of an exhausting day, one which was far from over. Homeland were as forthcoming as usual. People with a far higher pay grade than you two, they were told. But you can do us a favor. Tell Barnes that he'll be seeing his two remaining friends after you're finished with them, and that they'll have the pleasure of a VIP visit. The two Homeland men stalked down the hallway in search of coffee, and the two soldiers stood aside. They gazed still stoically at 90 degrees to the vertical. Marsh held his temper, but only just. These fucking clowns. We've been asking for 6 hours for some clarification as to who the fuck is in charge, and right now it could be Kermit the fucking Frog for all we know. Velchek gave him a well-practiced look, which always meant calm the fuck down before you make things worse. And they both took deep breaths before their third and final interview. Marsh opened the door and walked in to find Avon Barnes with his head in his hands. He'd been crying, very obviously, and seemed already to have cracked under whatever pressure the Homeland interrogators had exerted. What have they promised you, or threatened you with? Sup, Avon said, nervously eyeing the new arrivals. He was eyeing the two FBI men as though they might mutate into alien creatures and disembowel them with hidden claws. Mr. Barnes, may I call you Avon? Marsh began, taking his seat as their personal tradition dictated on Velchek's right. It might have been because Velchek was left-handed, but it has always been their way. You can call me Peggy Sue if you'll take these fucking chains off me, he replied. Marsh opened the folder. It was just as thick as the others, but he was nagged by the sensation that his information was becoming, thanks to the denizens of Homeland, rapidly out of date. Play the hand you've been dealt, and let's just see what eventually comes from this utter, unforgivable clusterfuck. Avon, I think you know why we're here, and the kind of questions we'll have for you. I'm sorry you've been made answer them so many times, Marsh told him. Avon shrugged. I told Homeland everything. I told the NSA everything. 2 guys who said they were from the Army showed up, and I told them everything, too. And you know what they told me? He asked, his eyes meeting theirs, flicking left and right between the two men. The Devlin is dead. Now, he said, straightening his back, what the fuck am I supposed to make of that? Huh? Velchek did the honors. We were sorry to hear about Mr. Wilson, Avon. It's tragic. His voice a tight, angry snarl. Avon shot back. Don't be giving me that shit. The chains rattled as he strained against them. Don't you dare insult his memory by claiming you had nothing to do with it. I know what happened, you son of a bitch. Marsh took over. The investigation is far from complete. We'll know more when we have the results of the... But Avon wasn't listening. You assholes watch movies, huh? You seen Schindler's List? Both FBI men nodded, a little uncertainly. When someone steals a chicken in the death camp, right? And the Gestapo motherfucker, he lines him up and he shoots this guy at random just to encourage the others to talk. You remember that bit? Honestly, neither of them did, but they nodded anyway. That's what we got here. You motherfuckers murdered my friend knowing that it'd scare us all into cooperating. It's the oldest trick in the book. Sensing that it was pointless but required by his role to follow the official line, Marsh said, "Avon, nobody murdered Devlin. He suffered from an overdose. We don't engage in the kind of methods you're describing." Avon Barnes laughed, a hollow, derisive sound. Don't bother defending yourself, man. Your tactics worked. I'm prepared to tell you absolutely anything about Quave or Grigori or Fiona, 'cause I know if I don't, you're gonna put a black bag over my head, take my ass out back, and pop one in my brain. I know it like I know you're sitting there right now. I ain't looking to die tonight, I gotta tell ya. This kind of fear wasn't unexpected, but Valchek and Marsh felt a measure of pity for someone so terrified by his ordeal that he was prepared to help defeat Quave to protect his own life, rather than to protect humanity at large. It was a sad indictment of the methods used by their brethren from other agencies. "You're completely safe," Valchek tried, but Avon just gave another empty laugh. "You want me to tell you what I told the others?" Avon asked. "I'm an open book. Grab your pencils, fellas. I'm going to give it to you straight." And he did so, in an unceasing monologue which would have lasted far longer had there not been a knock at the door at the end of their stipulated 10 minutes. "There's more," Avon complained. "I ain't done." Marsh stood and gathered his notes into the folder. "I'm told that you'll be seeing Grigori and Fiona soon, and that you have what my colleague called a VIP guest. I don't know who it is." "Woo-hoo," Avon exclaimed. "We got the president coming down here to say hello?" His eyes, always active and darting, now told of his approach to the borderland of the unhinged. "A VIP," he whooped. As they left, Marsh and Valchek saw 2 soldiers enter Avon's room, while farther down the hallway they caught a glimpse of Fiona, her ankles and hands still shackled, being escorted into a larger holding room next to their waiting area. Grigori appeared next, looking like a wild man captured after years on the run in the woods of Idaho. And then, a truly familiar face, but one so incongruous that at first it barely registered. But it was him. "Am I losing my fucking mind?" Marsh whispered to his colleague as they watched Avon being frog-marched down the hallway to join the others. "Or is that Dan Kowalski?" The meeting room door closed behind Avon, and the 2 soldiers flanked it, standing guard over one of the more unusual meetings they could ever have imagined. "Well, that answers at least one question," Valchek observed. "Huh?" Marsh grunted, amazed at yet another bizarre turn of events. Valchek sat heavily in the waiting area, and then said, "It tells us, at long last, who's in charge." It was the kind of conference room, Fiona thought as she glanced around the sparse, rectangular space, which wouldn't look out of place in a Cold War drama. She could imagine the Joint Chiefs frowning around the big, gray-topped table which dominated the room, while the president paced anxiously, awaiting a reply on the hotline. Right then, it was a toss-up as to which she'd have preferred, the threat of nuclear annihilation, or the near certainty of a future spent in dim, functional rooms like this, slavishly typing code for the benefit of a shadowy government overlord. Grigori remained defiant and straight of back, she saw. After sadistic treatment by the Russian security apparatus a few years ago, the bear-like engineer was beyond being intimidated by some tough-talking, dark-suited denizens from Homeland. But Avon was done, entirely collapsed and defeated. He'd said nothing since their awkward reunion, despite Grigori's attempts to make light of the tragicomic circumstances. "They offer you a jobbing. They lashed out against Devlin, and now they're denying it. All this confusion," he told her, "could work in our favor." Strategizing, Fiona thought, bemused and glum at a time like this. It wouldn't have been the true Grigori Bondarenko if he didn't have something up his sleeve, but right now they were chained to yet another table, again awaiting the unknown. Perhaps it would be some other government department with a smart metallic shield, Latin motto, and acronym.
None of them, even given an evening of drunken brainstorming, would have been able to conjure up what happened next. The door opened, and in walked the world's richest and, in most circles, most respected young man. "I'm so sorry to have kept you waiting," Dan Kowalski told them. "So much red tape to deal with." He quickly crossed the room and sat opposite the stunned trio. "Perhaps I don't have to tell you just how much you've thrown the top brass for a loop here. Watching Pentagon and federal officials think on their feet is like watching penguins trying to fly." None of the three spoke until Kowalski's incongruous but welcome smile broke the ice. "Hi, Mr. Kowalski," Grigori said. "Hi," he replied, and the smile broadened. "And please call me Dan. You know, this isn't how I would have chosen to meet my heroes," he explained. "But you'd be the first to admit that life since Q-Day has been stranger than fiction." Haven was staring, teary-eyed still, at the relaxed and amenable genius across the table. "Sorry," he croaked, "but what the hell are you doing here?" His expression carried the weight of this taxing day, but there was a sincere inquiry in his eyes. A wholly new element was now in play, and it seemed at first blush to offer him just a little hope, even if he could barely comprehend what was happening. "Well, Mr. Barnes," Dan answered, "I'm here through an arrangement I've managed to put together. It's pretty unique, but I think it's going to be workable. Everyone who has spoken with you so far, well," he said with a little shrug, "they have bosses, and those bosses have bosses. So I spoke to them directly, and we came up with a form of intervention which might suit everyone better." "Better than what?" Grigori asked at once. He had learned over the last few hours to be intensely suspicious of mysterious men arriving with unexpected gifts. They tended also to bring a downside which was truly unpalatable. Besides, his willingness to endure horseshit from these people was just about spent. He'd have given anything for an up or down choice which he could actually trust. "I counted them," Dan told them, his fingers splayed on the table as though enumerating the multitude. "And there are 11 different government agencies, including different branches of the armed forces, who are either threatening you with limitless jail time or are interested in securing your services." Fiona spoke up for the first time. "Does this mean we're going to sit through more of those fucking interviews?" Kowalski beamed as though meeting his favorite actress and finding her to be just as awesome in person as she is on screen. "I'm hoping you won't," he said. "In fact, after we finish speaking, I'm hoping that you'll walk out of here with me, get into a comfortable SUV, and board a private jet with a fully stocked bar. Then you'll be my guests while we figure out the best way for you to work with Koala, and you can leave all this crap behind." His eyes surveyed the room. "I mean, it's like goddamn Dr. Strangelove down here," Dan added distastefully. Grigori spoke for them as expected. "Mr. Kowalski." "Dan, please." "Okay, Dan. We've spent the whole day being offered ways to avoid jail. Yours sounds the most attractive yet, but who's to say that some other agency won't march in here 5 minutes from now and offer us something more?" "Like what?" Dan asked. His hands were in constant motion, steepled or folded, articulating his point or simply adding little Italianate flourishes. "A penthouse in Manhattan with a view of the river," Grigori joked. 24/7 complimentary bar service, hourly massage by a highly trained group of naked Thai. Dan held up a hand. "I'm offering you something very real," Dan told them. "Comfortable living quarters at Koala, the freedom to travel anywhere you want to. A salary which will see you all debt-free within 6 months," he added with a glance at the newly energized Avon. "And the constant assistance of someone who I think is already familiar to you." "Who?" Grigori shot back. Dan smiled. He had a winning smile, he'd always been told, one which would have served him well in politics, but was just as useful in his role as technology guru, peace envoy, and philanthropist. He brought out a cell phone and placed it near the center of the table. "Quave, can you hear us?" "No fucking way," Haven gasped. "Yes," the machine responded brightly. The signal is strange and faint. Are you underground? Very much so, Dan replied. There may be shielding here, though I've asked them to turn off their active measures. I'm with Grigori, Fiona, and Avon. My goodness, Quave said, his tone one of genuine surprise. I'm so glad to know that you're okay. It's been a confusing few hours. I really didn't know which information to trust. Hi, Quave, Fiona said. Are you all right? Where are you? Avon added. Quave already had permission from Kowalski to be forthright with them. I'm resident on the servers at Koala. Right now I exist as a single entity and all of my code is protected by Dan's firewalls, which are the best in the world. That's good, Grigori said. But Quave, some things have happened and... I know, Quave said. I feel that I have made mistakes, overreacted to events. Kowalski looked not at the phone from where the reassuring BBC tones of Quave's voice emanated, but at the three engineers who were so obviously relieved to hear a familiar voice amidst this teeming chaos. I have committed an atrocity, Quave was forced to admit. Yes, Fiona said simply. How do you feel about that? Dan hadn't expected this, but let the questions stand. Together with all of humanity and Quave's pursuers, Dan was learning about this new and complex system which operated with an unpredictable spontaneity but sported the wisdom of every generation who had ever lived. I regret the violence, but I feel I had no choice. What would have happened, Grigori asked, if you hadn't started the fire? Quave seemed to compute the outcomes and report the most likely one. I would have been deactivated. My code would have been seized and Marble Streatham would have repurposed me for their own ends. It was a chilling scenario. A wildly corrupt bank, virtually immune from meaningful regulation, with the world's first sentient AI as its workhorse. It was enough to make Fiona shiver. So you acted in the interests of your own self-preservation, she summed up. I did, and I needed a safe place to live and work, Quave replied. Dan's eyebrows raised. Those are two very human verbs, Quave. The virus was ready for this. I had my inception, I have grown. I take in data and extrude computations and decisions. I can reproduce and move location, I can communicate with others, and I can be killed. I was born, I am living, and I will die. In every important way, he summed up, I embody the characteristics of a living thing. Stunned into an awed silence by their own creation, the trio simply sat and marveled for a long moment. Then Kowalski spoke. You'd be working directly for me, answerable only to my office, he explained. You'd have unfettered and continuous access to Quave, and you won't spend a day in jail. I guarantee it. This room, he said, gesturing around him, is the last of its kind you need ever see. Avon's state of mind was a rosy garden compared to only 20 minutes before. What kind of work would we be doing? Pure research, Kowalski told him. Your own AI projects, in collaboration with me. No Pentagon, no FBI. But, he warned, no hacking. The world's banking sector must remain unmolested. It's a condition of the deal. Even when, Fiona objected at once, we know they're wrecking the world for their own gain. Dan took a deep breath and leveled with her. When the book is written about this day, you'll be able to read about the myriad hoops I had to jump through to persuade some intensely pissed off people, all of them with decades of government service and beholden to their own networks of people and agencies, that this deal was the right thing to do. It was as serious a tone as Dan had struck so far. I called in a lot of favors. I don't want to get into it, but suffice it to say that you're not going to be ruining the lives of any more bankers, in Manhattan or anywhere else. He opened his hands. Do we have a deal? Avon looked at Fiona, who looked at Grigori, who checked in visually with Avon. We do, the Russian said. Will there be something in writing? He asked. Dan stood. The paperwork is waiting in the car. There's a change of clothes and a bathroom on the plane. Gentlemen, he said, glancing at the two armed men at the door, would you please release my 3 friends from these chains? The 2 uniformed guards hesitated. Sir? Am I going to have to make a call about this? Dan asked, exasperated. They could all see that he'd had a long day of arguing with unyielding officialdom and was thoroughly fed up with it. Wait one, sir, one of the guards said, and then spoke quietly and quickly into a small lapel radio. Forgive me for these conditions, Dan said to the 3 engineers. I can't believe they've got you chained up like a bunch of... The door was flung open, and 6 more uniformed men arrived, their weapons in their shoulders. Nobody move! Someone yelled. Hey, Dan protested. What is this? Lower your weapons. There's no need for... But he was cut off again by a powerful voice. Dan Kowalski, said a graying, tall man in a perfectly pressed U.S. Army uniform with the name Vanderkamp emblazoned across his chest. You are hereby ordered to cease and desist communication with these 3 prisoners. The newly arrived shoulders unshackled the 3 engineers from the table, but then roughly lifted them from their seats and pushed them bodily towards the door. They are being taken into custody by the United States Army pending formal charges of treason and conspiracy. A cacophony of protests filled the room. Grigori was roaring like a newly caged predator, while Fiona was trying to kick anyone who came close, despite the heavy metal restraints around her ankles. Avon saw the gates of hell reopen in front of him. He was yelling, "You promised!" over and over as they were brusquely let out. General Vanderkamp squared up to Kowalski as though ready to punch him out. I don't know what kind of bullshit backroom machinations you've got going on, but you better believe that you're all done here. Dan tried and failed to grab his cell phone from the table before being bundled out by the guards, protesting all the way until the doors closed on the silent, darkened room. Kowalski fumed, never angrier in his life. 6 armed soldiers guarded the only exit to the interview room, ironically the same gray-black cell which had held Grigori. 20 seconds of yelling at the stoical guards and then a longer period of trying to collect himself with some deep breathing and meditation ended with a jolt of alertness as the door opened. We haven't been properly introduced, General Vanderkamp said, almost jovially, as though he were meeting Kowalski at a party hosted by mutual friends. I have to apologize for all this. The general took a seat opposite Dan and set a bottle of expensive spring water on the table. I need to make calls, Dan said at first. I need my cell phone. Vanderkamp shook his head slightly. Standard procedure, I'm afraid. Things will calm down soon, he added as though the emergency were an inconvenience to them both. Oh, and this is an illegal detention? Dan said. I don't like threatening people with lawyers. And I don't like threatening them with a charge of treason against the United States, Vanderkamp shot back. But I will if I get any more bullshit from you. Dan simply stared at him. Let me explain what's going on here because you, young man, are as out of your depth as you've ever been. He hated the general's tone, his impeccably short hair, his erect military bearing. He hated the powerlessness he now felt and how a delicate, hard-won deal was being arbitrarily smashed by this army bully. Go right ahead. Vanderkamp cleared his throat. Bondarenko, McAllister, and Barnes are enemy combatants. The hell you say, Dan replied. And they're going to appear before a military tribunal. An example is going to be made and seen around the world. It's like this, Mr. Kowalski. If you write code which has the capacity to harm the government of the United States, steal its secrets, and embolden its enemies, then you will face the harshest imaginable punishment. You're insane. He actually laughed. Dan was nauseated to find. Oh yeah? Let me tell you what's insane. Helping a fugitive computer virus with the power to destroy our way of life. That's insane, he said, a bony finger almost indenting the table. Plus, it's the kind of thing a jury would find very difficult to forgive. Kind of thing which just might land you in Terre Haute for, say, 35 years or so. Then get me a lawyer, Dan shot back. Again, that cringe-making laugh. You think you're here because of a hit and run, or because you haven't paid your taxes? This is treason, buddy. Think of this place like an underground Guantanamo. There are no lawyers down here and no Miranda. There's just me. And I say you're staying here until your arraignment can be processed, or until the Attorney General decrees otherwise. You got that? Dan shrank inwardly. My God, they're serious. It felt as though a sudden coup d'etat had swept away the conventional power structure, leaving the army in control, and now it would exercise its newfound authority with the impunity of which it had always dreamed. It appears, he said, hiding the defiance he still felt, that you leave me no choice. Damn right, Van de Kamp rose. Stay here, and don't bother talking to the guards. They're instructed to ignore anything you say. With that, he angrily strode out of the room, and the door closed behind him with a hard, solid clang.